Our story begins as he tears up every one of his credentials, ready to challenge the family's massive conglomerate. Only then did she realize that her husband was someone she could no longer control. But as she looked at the divorce papers he handed over, she was stunned to see he was leaving with nothing. He was even giving up custody of their son. Their marriage had long been a hollow shell, and he simply had no desire to keep up the pretense any longer. Signing would be best for everyone, especially since she and her mother wanted Jiang Jingran as a son-in-law. He was merely making room for him. With those words, he prepared to leave the cage he called a home, assuming the woman would be sensible enough to sign. Instead, she tore the agreement to shreds. We learned that he had been groomed by the Su family to be their son-in-law since childhood, marrying at 20. At 22, he and Su Qingwan had a son, Gunyinshan. The boy took after his mother, always silent and distant, never showing his father any affection. But last night, the boy approached him for the first time to say, "Dad, Uncle Jiang is very sick and dying. His last wish is to marry Mommy. Can you and Mommy get a divorce?" In that moment, he completely lost all hope for this mother and son. Fine, let it be over. During breakfast, he took the initiative to hand the divorce papers to Su Qingwan, having considered his son's words. All through the night, since the boy loved Jiang Jingran so much, he decided he would also give up custody of the child and leave empty-handed. He told her to put his share of their marital assets in the boy's name. As a form of child support, Su Qingwan merely set down her coffee and looked up. "Were you just talking to me?" he heard her ask. Seeing the Bluetooth headset in her ear, he realized she hadn't heard a single word. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over him. Every time he spoke, he was met with this same cold indifference. To be honest, it was exhausting. He flipped the agreement to the final page and pushed it toward her. "Just sign it. It won't take more than a few minutes." Su Qingwan frowned and glanced at him. Just as she was about to look at the papers, their son ran into the room. "Mommy, wait. Aren't you going to play billiards with Uncle Jiang? I want to go too." As Su Qingwan started to stand up, he firmly pressed his hand down on hers. "Sign first." Su Qingwan finally turned to look at him, surprised by this sudden display of strength. Beside them, their son continued to urge his mother to hurry, worried that if they kept Uncle Jiang waiting any longer, he might get angry again. Seeing this, he decided to grant them their wish. A moment later, Su Qingwan looked down, and without even glancing at the contents, she picked up the pen and signed. As the mother and son hurried away, he didn't look back, focusing instead on the paper. He wrote his own name right next to hers. In this lifetime, their names had only appeared side by side twice, first on their marriage certificate and now here. Even after signing, his hand was still trembling slightly. He closed the agreement and sent it to the lawyer he had already contacted. After that, he went upstairs to pack. Looking at the wardrobe full of clothes, he realized with a start that there wasn't a single item he actually liked. Before he was 16, he had loved to laugh loudly, to go bungee jumping, and to race cars. But ever since marrying Su Qingwan, he had been taught to follow the rules. He had to be humble and gentle, because the Su family only needed a proper Mr. Gu. Yet, despite his efforts, he only received ridicule from Su Qingwan's friends. They called him a fake person, believing Jiang Jingran was a much better match for her. Thinking of this while looking at these clothes belonging to Mr. Gu, he felt a sudden, sickening wave of disgust. He rushed into the bathroom, struggling to catch his breath for a long while. When he finally looked at his reflection in the mirror, he felt a surge of certainty. Divorce was the right choice. He could no longer live in this cage. He wanted to break free and be himself again. So, he called a friend to pick him up. The Su residence wasn't his home, and his own family, the Gus, had ignored him ever since the wedding. His friend soon arrived at the gate, looking completely bewildered. "How do you have time for me today?" his friend asked. "It's your birthday. A week ago. Didn't you say you were spending it with your wife and son?" He froze, pulling out his phone to check his messages, only to realize that he had indeed booked a restaurant a week prior. He had even sent Su Qingwan a message about the date, but even now, she had never replied. In the past, he might have felt devastated, but now he felt only a cold numbness. He got into the car, and they headed to the restaurant. However, when they arrived and gave the reservation number, the manager looked at them with an awkward expression and offered a refund. "I'm sorry, sir, but President Su has booked the entire venue today to celebrate Mr. Gu's birthday with the young master. We will compensate you double for your deposit." His friend scoffed. "No need for a refund. The man you're looking for is standing right in front of you." As we walk toward the center of the hall, the joyful laughter of a family of three echoes from nearby. There, we see Su Qingwan, accompanied by young Gunyinshan, offering birthday blessings to Jiang Jingran. She wishes him peace and prosperity, while the boy adds his own wish that Uncle Jiang's dreams come true, specifically, that he marries his mother and becomes his father. After the blessings, the three of them sit down happily. We notice that Su Qingwan's gaze never leaves Jiang Jingran, and even her son, Ninshan, is thoughtfully pulling out a chair for the man. The boy helps pour tea and straightens Jiang's clothes. In 5 years of marriage, Qingwan never even learned when her husband's birthday was, let alone offered a blessing. As for his own child, the boy had never once poured him a glass of water. His friend, unable to watch this injustice, tries to rush forward to demand an explanation. But he stops him. There is no point now. He has already signed the divorce papers with Su Qingwan. His friend immediately takes him back to his own home. He doesn't cry, but his friend breaks down, hugging him while cursing Qingwan as a thief and Nianchen as an ungrateful wolf. He tries to calm his friend down, but the man continues, reminding him how for 5 years he revolved his entire life around that mother and son. He had no job and no social life. Whenever his friend managed to invite him out, a single phone call from Su Qingwan would send him running home as happy as a child to prepare hangover soup for her. When his son was weaning, he stayed up through the crying and chaos, patiently feeding him bowl after bowl. He poured his heart and soul into them, only to be met with betrayal. His friend is certain that he must be suffering inside, urging him to just let the tears out. Listening to this recount of his life, he simply tilts his head and takes a sip of beer. Leaning back on the sofa, he realizes he can't cry now, though he certainly cried many times in the past. To be honest, he had reached his limit. He remembered being forced to learn the family rules, and how his attempts to confide in Su Qingwan were always met with cold indifference. On snowy nights, he would wait until midnight for her to return, still clinging to a naive hope. He remembered the time Nianchen had a fever in the middle of the night, and when he called Su Qingwan, she simply hung up on him. Back then, he had truly expected a life of mutual love and fatherly devotion, but they never truly saw him. After 5 years, it was finally time to wake up, following a night of heavy drinking. He falls into a deep, heavy sleep. Early the next morning, he is suddenly awakened by a call from Su Qingwan. Her voice is still raspy from sleep, as she asks where he put the necklace she wore on Monday. He tells her calmly that it is in the first drawer of the dressing room. He tells her the matching earrings are in the drawer right below the necklace. Only after answering does he realize what he's doing. He and Su Qingwan are about to divorce. He no longer needs to be her personal assistant. He kindly suggests she have the nanny reorganize the dressing room so she can ask them for help in the future. After all, they are getting a divorce, and calling him to find her things is no longer appropriate. Su Qingwan responds with only a faint, indifferent hum. He hears the sound of a drawer opening on the other end. Thinking everything has been made clear, he prepares to hang up. But then he hears her command. For the next few days, he is to make seafood porridge and deliver it to her office. She hangs up immediately. It seems she hasn't listened to a single word he said about the divorce. He takes a deep breath, his fingertips trembling with a mix of exhaustion and anger. Without another thought, he blocks Su Qingwan's number, then does the same to Gu Nianchen's kindergarten teacher. However, he forgets to block Su's mother. Later, as he heads out for lunch, she intercepts him and pulls him into her car. She throws a stack of photos at his face, all of them showing Su Qingwan in intimate poses with Jiang Jingran. She tells him how disappointed she is, reminding him that since he was 16, she has personally groomed him to be the perfect husband. 10 years have passed, and yet, he still hasn't managed to capture his wife's heart. She laments that if she had known he was this useless, she wouldn't have been so quick to reject Jiang Jingran just because of his status as an illegitimate son. The sharp edge of a photo grazes his neck, leaving a small cut. When the Su family chose him as their future son-in-law, his friends were envious of his luck, but the price was his freedom. Since 16, his only purpose was to become Mr. Gu. The pressure was suffocating. In high school, he rebelled by dating someone else, hoping Su Qingwan would call off the engagement. But she said nothing. Though the marriage lasted 5 years, he has actually been their puppet for 10 long years. He has had enough. He tells her he already signed the divorce papers, waived custody, and left with nothing. If she is unsatisfied, he suggests she find a more suitable son-in-law. With that, he opens the car door and walks away. Mother Su freezes for a second before her temper flares, and she grabs Gu Yanxi's wrist with a sharp, desperate command. How dare you? Her sharp, blood-red nails dig into his skin like needles, but Yanxi simply smiles. To be honest, he has nothing left to fear. Being the Su family's son-in-law was never an honor for him. He slowly pulls up his sleeve, revealing a hidden truth. For the first time, he shows an outsider the old, twisted scars lining his wrist. Mother Su is so shocked she immediately lets go. He tells her he never wanted to be Mr. Gu. For 10 years, he has had the same recurring nightmare. In those dreams, he was always screaming for someone, anyone, to save him from this gilded cage. But now he understands that the only person who can save him is himself. Only by being free can he truly live. He finishes speaking with a calm that borders on indifference, then steps out of the car. This time, Mother Su doesn't stop him. A little later, the suffocating weight in his chest still hasn't lifted. He needs a release, so he takes out Chun Feng's bright red supercar. He floors the accelerator, but it seems Su Qingwan is his eternal shadow. As he crosses an intersection, he collides with a Maybach. The license plate has 5/8. It's Qingwan's car. Her assistant quickly steps out to inspect the damage and stops in her tracks. The assistant stares at him in disbelief, whispering, Mr. Gu. We can't really blame her for being surprised by this sudden change. After 5 years of marriage, everyone around Qingwan saw him as a submissive shadow. Seeing such a man street racing is, naturally, quite strange. Yanxi offers no explanation. He simply hands over a card and tells her to send the bill for whatever repairs are needed. With that, he puts on his sunglasses and drives away. The assistant returns to the Maybach to report the encounter to Su Qingwan. She tells her boss that the driver was her husband. Qingwan merely pinches the bridge of her nose, her expression remaining cold and detached. Let's go, she says. It seems that whether the driver is her husband or a complete stranger, it makes no difference to her. The assistant stays quiet, but 3 hours later, fate brings the couple together again. Qingwan is at a suburban racetrack for a business deal. A race is currently underway, and we see a red car dominating the track, capturing everyone's attention with a display of pure adrenaline. The car takes first place with ease. The driver steps out, clad in a dark red racing suit that fits him like a second skin. His tall, slender figure is so striking that it's impossible to look away, and even Su Qingwan shows a visible flash of surprise. She watches with genuine admiration until the racer removes his helmet, revealing his identity. Her assistant gasps, but Qingwan remains silent. The atmosphere is electric, as if a starting gun had just fired a shot of pure adrenaline into the crowd. She notices the feverish gazes of the women around her fixed on that tall figure, and her eyes narrow slightly. Yancy, however, doesn't look up. He doesn't even try to greet her. Over the years, unless they were at a high-class gala, she usually pretended not to know him. So, when the race organizer introduces him to Su Qingwan, Yancy decides to play along and pretend they are total strangers. President Su, I've heard much about you, he says. Qingwan remains expressionless, and the air between them grows thick with awkwardness. The silence lasts until Jiang Jingran's voice breaks through, asking if Qingwan is finished so they can return to the office for dinner. Yancy turns to see Jingran stepping out of the Maybach, walking toward them with an air of casual belonging. Jingran acts as if no one else exists but Qingwan. He even smiles at Yancy, likely not realizing he's smiling at his supposed rival. As they walk away, someone nearby sighs about how sweet it is that President Su brings Mr. Jiang to work. Their bond seems perfect. Qingwan's assistant, who hasn't left yet, hears this and looks at Yancy with a strange, almost pitying expression. He suspects she's wondering how a man could be so powerless. Saying nothing, he leaves the track and immediately calls his lawyer. He asks when he can finally get the divorce certificate. The answer is simple. He needs to wait 7 more days. 7 days. Well, that's no problem at all, considering he has already endured 10 long years of this. He can certainly wait another week. However, just as he begins to calm his nerves, he receives a call from Qingwan's assistant. She asks when the seafood porridge will be delivered. She also mentions that young Master Nianxin's teacher has been trying to reach him. Apparently, the boy's handmade school project hasn't been turned in yet. She asks if it would be convenient for him to drop it off. Yancy remembers how, just before Gu Nianxin told him to divorce his mother, he had been following a video tutorial to sew that project. Before he walked out of that house, the handmade assignment was only half finished, sitting there as a reminder of a life he left behind. Gazing up at the clouds drifting freely across the sky, Yancy calmly tells the assistant to inform Su Qingwan that the seafood porridge is no more. He won't be delivering it ever again, and as for Gu Nianxin's school project, he won't be handling that either. He tells her not to call him again, and promptly blocks the assistant's number. Meanwhile, back at the Su group, the assistant stares at her phone in awkward silence. She nervously reports that Mr. Gu hung up on her, and when she tried to call back, the line wouldn't go through. It seems he has blocked her. Hesitantly, she suggests that perhaps the president should try calling him herself. Su Qingwan actually takes out her phone, finds her husband's profile, and sends a blunt message. What kind of scene are you making? A second later, a red exclamation mark appears. A notification informs her that she is no longer on his friend list and must send a verification request. To be honest, it's a bit of a shock. The assistant catches a glimpse of the chat history on Qingwan's screen and notices the last message was from a week ago. It occurs to her then that Yancy's birthday falls on the exact same day as Jiang Jingran's, which means yesterday was his birthday too. The realization hits the assistant quite hard. She cautiously asks the president if she had forgotten to send him a birthday gift. Qingwan simply replies that she hadn't noticed. It's a cold response, but given their history, we shouldn't be surprised. The assistant certainly isn't, especially seeing the walls of unanswered messages Yancy had sent over the months without a single reply from Qingwan. However, Qingwan suddenly instructs her to arrange a belated gift, telling her to pick out something appropriate. The assistant agrees immediately, but before she can even pull out her phone to start browsing, she sees that Qingwan has already returned to her documents. With a quiet sigh, the assistant leaves the office to quickly fulfill the request. By that evening, the gift arrives at Yancy's door. The assistant presents it as a peace offering from President Su, but Yancy refuses to even look at it. He truly has no idea what Qingwan is trying to achieve. The birthday has passed. What use is a gift now? Besides, for the past 10 years, he has only ever had one birthday wish, his freedom. In a strange twist of fate, Qingwan's demand for a divorce has finally granted him that wish. He assumes these final 7 days will pass in silence. But shortly after the assistant leaves, a new message arrives, this time from Su Qingwan's mother, addressed directly to Gu Yancy. The message is blunt. She won't interfere with the divorce, but until it's final, her grandson must not be affected in any way. Yancy finds this ironic, considering Nianxin was the one who demanded the divorce. Before he can even reply, more messages flash across the screen. If he doesn't want the divorce proceedings to be disrupted, he must go to the family estate this weekend to accompany his son, as usual. Since Qingwan dislikes crowds, they had moved into a private villa after the wedding, leaving the ancestral Su family home behind. After Nianchen was born, they made it a tradition to visit the old estate every weekend. Today happens to be Friday, the usual travel day. Normally, Yanxi would pick Nianchen up from kindergarten and head to the estate alone, as Qingwan is usually busy working until 10. This time, he heads straight to the estate, only to find that Qingwan has surprisingly arrived home early as well. He tries to ignore her and head upstairs, but Qingwan blocks his path, inexplicably asking if he liked his birthday gift. He stares at her for a moment, wondering if she truly doesn't know he rejected it. Then again, she usually treats him like thin air. Not wanting to start an argument, he gives a perfunctory nod, only for her to immediately follow up with a demand. She tells him that Nianchen is currently carving a peace talisman for Jingran, and that Yanxi needs to go upstairs to help her finish it. It seems that gift came with strings attached after all. To be honest, he should have seen that coming. He deliberately brushes past Qingwan and heads upstairs without a word. She frowns, but for once, she chooses to say nothing. Upon reaching the second floor, we see Nianchen sitting at her desk, clutching a carving knife with intense, focused concentration. As Yanxi approaches, he notices a finished peace talisman already sitting on the desk. The girl is carefully copying the design step by step. The sound of his footsteps startles Nianchen. She looks up, but her first instinct is to snatch the finished talisman off the table. She glares at him, warning her father that this specific piece was carved by her mother for Uncle Jiang, and he isn't allowed to steal it. A sharp pain flares in Yanxi's chest. The child he once valued more than his own life is now looking at him like he's a common thief. Looking at her face, so much like her mother's, he feels a sudden, suffocating bitterness. He tells her there's no need to be so guarded. He has never wanted what belongs to others. Besides, he and her mother will be divorced very soon, so it won't matter much longer. Nianchen's words cut deep. She claims Uncle Jiang will soon be her new father. To be honest, it's a cruel thing for a child to say. Qingwan immediately snaps, asking Yanxi if he thinks he's being a fit father by speaking to the child this way. This is likely the longest sentence she's ever spoken to him. He turns around, meeting Qingwan's indifferent gaze with a soft, weary smile. He admits that perhaps he isn't fit for the role. He tells her she should simply find the girl a better father, and with that, he turns to walk toward the door. Suddenly, Qingwan steps forward and grabs his hand, her voice low and laced with a strange tension. But just then, Nianchen's watch begins to ring. The girl happily urges her mother away, shouting that Uncle Jiang is calling her on a video chat. In the very next second, Qingwan lets go of Yanxi's hand. We see her walk over to answer the call without a backward glance. The icy expression she wore just moments ago melts into a smile. Realizing how pointless this all is, Yanxi returns to the guest room and locks the door. The room feels freezing. Despite it being June, he feels as though he's lying in a coffin, buried deep in the cold earth. And yet, there is a familiar sense of peace. From the moment he handed over the divorce papers, he had already prepared himself for the worst. His dreams that night are chaotic, but his internal clock still wakes him at 5 in the morning. Normally, this is when his routine would begin. He would usually get up to prepare breakfast for the family. Remembering his mother-in-law's warnings, he rubs his temples and heads downstairs anyway. Once downstairs, he discovers that Qingwan and Nianchen left early. Apparently, they had an appointment with Jing Ran to watch the sunrise. It's almost laughable, really. Anyone can see that Nianchen doesn't need him as a father at all. Yet, Qingwan's mother insists he stay at the estate to endure the weekend. Sensing his mood, a friend invites him to a campus to clear his head. The 18-year-old girls there are charming, sweetly calling him Big Brother and offering the kind of warmth he hasn't felt in years. After spending a few days laughing and relaxing, his mood genuinely improves. His friend notices the change and is reluctant to let the moment go. The friend asks if seeing how kind these girls are has finally made him realize that Qingwan isn't worth his love anymore. Yanxi simply replies that he doesn't love her anymore. Seeing him so resolute, his friend grows even more enthusiastic. He tells Yanxi that he should have divorced her long ago, as almost anyone would be better than the cold and heartless Qingwan. His friend suggests that since Qingwan doesn't know how to care for people, he should find a sweet, obedient girl to marry and finally be happy. Yanxi is just laughing and about to reply when a sudden cough sounds from behind. He turns to see Qingwan and her assistant standing there. They aren't far away, but he pretends not to see her and tries to leave with his friend. He assumed she wouldn't bother him again. To his surprise, the woman steps forward and grabs him, telling him there is a gathering he needs to attend and to come with her. Without giving him a chance to refuse, she pulls him into the car. He sits there in a daze, as this is quite out of character for her. In his memory, Qingwan always treated him like air, with no emotion or opinions. This level of assertiveness was something he'd only seen in private. As he snaps back to reality, she suddenly speaks up, asking him what he thinks is most important for a family like theirs. It takes him a moment to realize she is actually arguing against what his friend said earlier. He can't help but let out a frustrated laugh. So, in her mind, love isn't important, and whether someone cares for another doesn't matter either. It's a cold perspective, to be sure. He asks why her important matters must rely on his constant sacrifice. Qingwan stares at him for several seconds, but says nothing. He no longer wants to waste energy guessing her moods. When they arrive at the club, he realizes this is just a small gathering of her friends. She had never brought him to this kind of event before. Truthfully, he doesn't like these people, as they have always looked down on him. They used to call him a fake person, so he doesn't bother smiling, simply drinking in silence until he feels a bit tipsy. He gets up to go to the restroom, and the moment he leaves, someone can't wait to start gossiping about his lack of a smile. They point out that he's even giving her attitude now, noting the rumors that the two of them are finally getting a divorce. Qingwan coldly asks who said she was getting a divorce. She declares that since she is married, Yancy will be her husband for life. Her friends are visibly shocked and ask if she's actually serious. Qingwan simply shoots them a sharp look and remains silent. The friend looks uneasy and, after a long pause, brings up President Jiang, the man she collaborated with on the AI project. We recall how she used to ignore her husband and never let him visit the company, keeping his identity a total secret from the world. No one even knew he was her husband, and now, word is spreading that she hasn't been able to win him back yet. Her friend continues, suggesting that if she truly plans to spend her life with Yancy, she should start showing him a bit more care. Otherwise, she warns, her husband might end up leaving just like her own did. Qingwan's hand pauses mid-swirl of her wine glass. With a cold, firm tone, she insists that will never happen. Meanwhile, inside the restroom, Yancy receives a text from his divorce lawyer. The message informs him that the divorce certificates for him and Qingwan have been processed and are ready for pickup at the firm. Finally, the day has arrived. He rushes to the lawyer's office, opening the certificate and reading it over and over again in disbelief. From this moment on, he is finally free to distance himself from the suffocating atmosphere of the Su family. As he leaves the office, his friend insists on celebrating his freedom with a meal he was never allowed to have before. He is taken to a lively night market stall, surrounded by the sights of milk tea, barbecue, and ice cream. His friend tells him to eat whatever he wants. Smelling the rich aroma of grilled meat, he finally feels like he is truly alive. That night, they drink beer and laugh without restraint, until Yancy laughs so hard he cries, feeling 10 years of chains finally melting away. Perhaps it is the years of suppressed emotion, but he finds himself removing his son, Nianchen, from his blacklist and dialing the number. The moment the call connects, his eyes redden as he tells Nianchen that despite the boy's dislike, he is still his biological father. He reminds the boy that he was the one who cared for him through every fever and helped him with his homework every single night. He declares that since the boy called him vicious to defend an outsider like Jiang Jingran, he is no longer his father, and the boy is no longer his son. Suddenly, Qingwan's icy voice comes through the receiver, asking him exactly what he thinks he is saying. Yancy freezes in shock. Realizing the child must be with her, he quickly shifts to a cold, mocking tone, suggesting she spend more time parenting than lecturing him. He tells her that her son actually begged him to divorce her just to make room for Jiang Jingran. The irony is that he has finally granted everyone's wish. Having said his piece, he immediately puts Nianchen back on the blacklist. Early the next morning, he books a flight out of the country, knowing his outburst and the divorce news will soon cause a storm. He knows the Su family won't let him go easily. They might even try to force him to his knees to beg for Qingwan's forgiveness. He suspects they might even threaten him with a forced marriage to another socialite. To avoid that, he must escape the city. He has no intention of ever returning. After saying goodbye to his friend, he packs a light bag and heads for the door. But at the entrance, he spots a familiar Maybach. Qingwan steps out with Nianchen and begins walking toward him. She tells Nianchen to apologize to his father. The boy, his face pale and tense, clutches his clothes as he approaches. He bows deeply, whispering that he is sorry and that he shouldn't have insulted his father. He promises never to mention divorce again. Deep down, the boy seems to believe that an apology can fix everything. Yancy simply tells him there is no need for apologies. He has already vented his anger and no longer cares. He is finished with the drama. However, as soon as he speaks, something quite unexpected happens. Qingwan actually opens her mouth to apologize, admitting she bears responsibility for not raising Nianchen better. Hearing her offer a sincere apology is a first, but can years of damage really be erased by a single sentence? He remembers the envelope in his bag that he intended to mail her from the airport. It seems fate has other plans. He tells her that if she truly feels sorry, she should be the one to drive him to the airport. She notes that the Su family has no business trips scheduled and asks where exactly he thinks he is going. He asks if he isn't allowed to have his own life. For the first time, we see a look of genuine confusion on Qingwan's face. He doesn't care. Since she was the one who brought him into the Su family's cage, it is only fitting she sees him out. It is time to cut the final tie. They drive to the airport in total silence, and before getting out, he hands her a box. He calls it a final gift. Qingwan hesitates, puzzled by his choice of words, but she eventually reaches out to take it. She thanks him, while little Nianchen looks up and asks if there is a gift for him as well. Yancy tells him it's inside. In his mind, this is a gift they should both be happy with. It is exactly what they have been asking for, after all. He tells them to wait an hour before opening it. By then, his plane will be safely in the sky, far away from them. She tells him to keep a good attitude and come home early, but he simply smiles and walks away without a word. He has no intention of returning. He is finally chasing his freedom, while Qingwan watches his lonely silhouette disappear into the airport. For some reason, a strange sense of dread fills her heart, and she reaches to open the box immediately. Nianchen stops her, reminding her they promised to wait an hour, and they really ought to keep their word. During that long hour, Qingwan stares at her documents but can't focus on a single word, her eyes drifting back to the gift. Finally, the time arrives, and Ninshin rushes to open it, wondering what secret gift his father could have possibly left them. As the lid is lifted, Qingwan turns her head and catches a clear glimpse of what lies inside. There, resting quietly in the box, is a divorce certificate, a sight even young Ninshin can recognize from his early lessons. The boy stares at the document, his little mouth mumbling in confusion as he asks his mother what a divorce certificate actually is. He wonders aloud if this little book is truly the gift his father promised them. To be honest, it is the only gift Yinsi felt they ever truly wanted, though Qingwan's mind has now gone completely blank. She snatches the box from Ninshin's hands, not even noticing that her own fingers are trembling uncontrollably. The small red book lies there peacefully, much like the man who had always been in that house, but was constantly ignored. Suddenly, a wave of immense panic washes over her, as if she knows that opening this book changes everything forever. After several deep breaths, she finally opens the red cover, and we see her eyes widen in shock. The moment she sees her name next to Yinsi's, she snaps the book shut with a sharp crack, her first instinct being to call him. But then she remembers he is likely mid-flight, and a surge of frustrated anger bubbles up inside her chest. Suppressing the urge to interrogate him in person, she calls her assistant and demands to know exactly where Yinsi is going. She orders the assistant to track his flight and, quite characteristically, tells them to bring him back the moment he lands. Furthermore, she demands to know who processed a divorce without a signed agreement, because in her world, things simply don't work that way. How could a divorce happen without a court summons? Her voice carries a panic and irritation she hasn't even noticed yet. On the other end, her assistant trembles. He has been by Qingwan's side since he joined the company and is stunned. He had never seen her show such vivid emotion before. Could this divorce really be because of the quiet, almost invisible Mr. Gu? The assistant shakes his head, finding the whole situation unbelievable, but he keeps his thoughts to himself and gets to work. Qingwan paces back and forth in her massive study with her hands on her hips, as that sense of unease grows even stronger. Finally, she pulls out her phone and sends a verification message to Yinsi, who had long ago blocked her. She demands to know what is going on. She tells him he is an adult and asks why he is playing such a prank, ordering him to call her the moment he lands. She adds that she and Ninshin are worried. After a long pause, her fingers tap against the screen once more. She types that if there is a problem, they can sit down and talk it out like adults. There is no need for this, she insists. He is a father now, not a child playing games. Or so she tells herself. Every message she sends vanishes into the void, leaving Qingwan to sink into her chair and pinch the bridge of her nose in exhaustion. Nearby, little Ninshin looks up from his building blocks and asks with heartbreaking innocence if this gift means Papa is leaving. Hearing those words, she feels a suffocating weight settle in her chest, a breath she simply cannot catch. The warnings her friends once gave her echo in her mind, and she finally murmurs Yinsi's name to the empty room. She wonders aloud if he has truly given up on her. Waiting, as we know, is always the hardest part. Qingwan loses track of how many times she checks her watch or how many messages she sends, but there is only silence. A strange, bitter feeling wells up inside her. They were so compatible, and for 5 years, everything had been perfectly fine. How could he suddenly divorce her and leave without saying a single word? It makes no sense to her whatsoever. Just then, her phone rings, and she presses the answer button instantly, not even waiting to see who is calling. She snaps into the receiver, asking Yinsi if he finally realized he should call her back after all her messages. "Why haven't you replied to any of my messages?" she demands, only for the other side to remain silent for a few long seconds before a voice finally speaks. "President Su. It's me," the voice continues. It isn't Yinsi at all, but her own assistant. The assistant nods to himself on the other end, reporting that he has investigated everything. The divorce agreement was indeed signed by her own hand. Both the appraisal department and the legal team have already verified the signature and the contents of the document. There are no issues, he tells her. At this, the anger Qingwan had been suppressing finally boils over, her voice rising in disbelief. "What do you mean there are no issues?" she snaps. The assistant explains that Mr. Gu didn't ask for a single cent of her assets in the divorce. He has essentially left with nothing. All the joint property under their names, including his own personal assets and shares, have been entirely allocated to young Master Ninshin. It seems he intended this as the child support he owes the boy. He didn't want her money, and strangely enough, he didn't even fight for custody of Ninshin. On the other end of the line, the assistant is breaking into a cold sweat, wiping his brow as he speaks. After all, even though he's seen his share of wealthy family secrets while working for Qingwan, he has never seen a divorce handled so cleanly. When others divorce, they usually try to strip a layer of skin off their partner, but Mr. Goose simply left without making a sound. The assistant wonders if the man truly didn't care or was just incompetent, but before he can think further, Qingwan hangs up. She grips her phone, unable to snap out of her daze for a long time. She simply cannot understand it. To her, their marriage was going perfectly well. How could it suddenly shatter like this? After a long silence, she exhales a heavy breath, asking either herself or the empty air, "Yinzi, what exactly were you so dissatisfied with?" Just then, the study door creaks open. Little Nianchen peeks in and scurries inside on his short legs. He throws his arms around Qingwan's legs, looking up at her with eyes full of a strange, eager anticipation. "Mommy, I asked Uncle Jiang. He said Papa giving us the divorce papers means I can have a new Papa now. Mommy, hurry up and marry Uncle Jiang. I want him to be my new Papa." In the past, hearing this would have been quite different. In the past, Qingwan would have dismissed such talk as childish nonsense. But now, the words felt exceptionally harsh. She wondered if Yancy had truly decided to divorce her because of their son's constant remarks. Thinking this, she couldn't help but frown and scold the boy. "You're only 3 years old. What do you know?" she snapped. "You are not allowed to say those things anymore. You only have one father. There is no such thing as a new father." Stunned by her sudden anger, little Nianchen's lip trembled before he burst into loud sobs. "I want a new papa. I just want Uncle Jiang," he wailed through his tears. "I want Uncle Jiang to be my new papa. I don't want my old papa anymore. All he does all day is act like a nanny, and he isn't fun at all." Hearing this, Qingwan felt a surge of white-hot fury rising within her. "Who told you to say those things?" she demanded. She should have realized sooner that Nianchen was only a 3-year-old child. If someone hadn't been whispering these ideas into his ear, how could he possibly understand the concept of divorce, or even think to call his own father a male nanny? It was all too much for Nianchen, who suddenly turned and bolted out the door, shouting, "I hate you, Mommy. You won't let me have a new papa." Qingwan felt a wave of agitation and messiness in her heart. She moved to stop him, but at that exact moment, her phone began to ring again. It was Jiang Jingran. For a split second, Qingwan hesitated between chasing after Nianchen and answering the call. Ultimately, she chose the latter. As soon as she picked up, Jingran's voice came through the line. "Qingwan, I heard from Nianchen that you and Yancy are getting a divorce. What on earth is going on? I hope it's just the child being silly and talking nonsense." Qingwan let out a long, weary She let out a long breath, insisting there had been a misunderstanding and that she had no intention of ever divorcing Gu Nianchen. She sounded firm, as if trying to convince herself as well. Was there anything else? Jingran fell silent for a moment, his tone dropping with disappointment. "We were supposed to take Nianchen to the amusement park to see the fireworks today. I hadn't heard from either of you, so I wanted to check in." "I'm sorry, I completely forgot," she replied coldly. "Perhaps another time, when there is an opportunity." By the time Qingwan finally put down the phone, little Nianchen was nowhere to be found. She wasn't overly concerned at first, given the many servants in the villa. Surely, she thought, they wouldn't lose sight of a 3-year-old child. And yet, right under everyone's noses, Nianchen had vanished. No one saw how he left the estate. Even the security cameras only captured a fleeting, lonely silhouette of the boy walking away into the distance. Qingwan led a search that turned the entire city of Jing upside down, but there was no trace of Nianchen. In her desperation, she tried calling Yancy's number repeatedly. However, the only response she received was the same cold, automated recording. "The number you have dialed is currently powered off. Please try again later." With no other choice, she had her assistant track down the phone number of Yancy's close friend to demand answers. "Hello, this is Qingwan. Has Gu Yancy contacted you? If you have any news regarding his whereabouts, I need you to tell him something immediately." She continued, her voice tight with stress. "Tell him that because he insisted on this divorce, Nianchen has gone missing. If he has any sense of duty left as a father, I expect him to return home this instant." But before she could finish her sentence, Yancy's friend interrupted her with a loud, impatient shout. "Stop, stop, stop. If the child is lost, you should call the police. What use is finding Gu Yancy? Does he have some sort of telepathic link with the boy? Do you expect him to just fly back, lock onto a target, and teleport directly to that little ungrateful brat's side? To be honest, your logic is baffling. And you claim the boy is missing because of the divorce? If Yancy wants out, it's only because you people pushed him to the brink. Divorce is exactly what he needs. Neither you nor that spoiled child are any good." With that, the line went dead. The phone clicked shut, but almost immediately, it began to ring again. It was Jiang Jingran. Qingwan answered quickly, hoping for news. But all she heard were frantic screams. "Qingwan, help. Someone is trying to kidnap us. Let go of Nianchen. Let him go. Don't be afraid. Watch out." Then, the call ended abruptly. Qingwan immediately ordered her team to track Jingran's GPS signal. When they finally arrived at the location, they found Jingran and Nianchen unconscious at the bottom of a slope near the national highway. Jingran was covered in bruises and looked completely disheveled, yet he was holding Nianchen tightly in his arms to protect him. Aside from some dust on his face, the boy hadn't suffered a single scratch. Everyone present was deeply moved by the sight, while Qingwan stood frozen. Her hands tightened at her sides as she watched the two of them being loaded into the ambulance, the flashing red and blue lights fading into the distance. Finally, she turned to her assistant and issued a cold command. "Investigate everything Jiang Jingran has done lately and everyone he has met. Do not overlook a single detail." The assistant was momentarily stunned, but she quickly realized the gravity of the situation. After all, she had accompanied President Su across the entire city without finding a trace of young Nianchen. How was it that Jingran found him so easily? With so many servants in the villa, how could a 3-year-old child vanish without anyone noticing? It was, to be honest, highly improbable. And if this truly were a kidnapping, why was there no ransom demand? Why would the kidnappers simply leave the boy on a national highway? Having fought her way through the business world for years, Qingwan could not ignore such glaring inconsistencies. Suspicion had firmly taken root. Before long, the evidence arrived, confirming that Jingran had orchestrated the entire kidnapping. Qingwan stared at the documents in heavy silence. "Withdraw the case from the police station," she finally said. "Keep this quiet and destroy the evidence. I don't want anyone else to know." She instructed that the official story would be that Jingran saved Nianchen. The assistant watched her, face filled with utter disbelief. It seemed President Su was going to protect the mastermind who kidnapped her own son. But before the assistant could speak, Qingwan was gone. Her silhouette vanished down the hospital corridor. A moment later, she pushed open the door to find Jingran leaning against his hospital bed. He looked pale, and as she watched him, her brow furrowed with a dark, unreadable emotion. Jingran let out a weak, fragile cough. "How is Nianchen?" he asked breathlessly. "Is he all right? He is still so small. This must have been so traumatic for him." He continued his performance, sighing. "It's all Gu Yanxi's fault. He just walked away and abandoned the child like that. How could a father be so irresponsible? I need to go see Nianchen right now." He made a move as if to get out of bed. However, as he tried to pass her, Qingwan grabbed his arm with a grip of iron. Her voice was low, dangerous, and tightly controlled. "Whether or not he is a fit father is not for anyone else to judge," she stated. It was a sharp defense of the man she was supposed to be divorcing. Jingren looked up at her cold, stony profile and froze. The face that had always treated him with such warmth was now devoid of any kindness. The icy look in her eyes was enough to make anyone's heart stop. Jingren clenched his fists, wondering where their years of affection had gone. Jingren stammered, asking how he could possibly be considered an outsider, before softening his tone to apologize for his momentary lapse in judgment. He continued, claiming this kidnapping was so heinous that even he, an adult, was left shaken and fearful for young Nianchen. He insisted he had watched the boy grow up and couldn't help but feel distressed, while Qingwan's hands tightened at her sides. Her gaze toward Jingran was now utterly freezing as she asked why, if he found it so heinous, he had hired people to do it. She demanded to know why he had staged this entire kidnapping of Nianchen, causing Jingran's pale face to instantly stiffen with shock. He tried to play the innocent, asking with wide eyes what she was talking about, but Qingwan offered no further explanation. Her eyes flashed with a complex mix of disappointment as she revealed she had already destroyed the evidence for his sake. She told him he was never to appear before Nianchen again. She would send him abroad and arrange his life there, provided he never returned. As she turned to leave, Jingran lunged forward, throwing his arms around her waist and begging her not to cast him away. He pleaded that he could change anything she disliked, reminding her of the many years they had spent together side by side. Qingwan remained unmoved, grabbing his wrists to pry him off, which sent Jingran into a state of pure, desperate panic. He cried out, asking why this was happening and admitting that perhaps he had been a bit too impatient this time. He argued that he only wanted to marry the person he loved, claiming he didn't care that Nianchen was another man's child. He promised to be good to the boy, but Qingwan shoved him away, her cold eyes filled with a sudden, sharp confusion. She asked him if the person he loved shouldn't have been her late sister, but he confessed that it had always been her. He reminded her of the years she had spent accompanying him, caring for him, and protecting him with such devotion. He pointed out how she remembered his birthday better than he did and was always there at his beck and call. He even claimed she treated him better than her own husband, asking how she could possibly say she didn't love him. It was as if a long-ignored string in Qingwan's mind finally snapped. She released his hands and took a sharp step back. She told him clearly that she only cared for him to fulfill her sister's dying wish, and that she felt no romantic love for him whatsoever. She told him the private jet would be ready that very day, and he should leave as soon as possible. With that, Qingwan turned away. She left the hospital room without looking back, while far away in Finland, Gu was completely unaware of these events. He had secured his residency permit. He applied to a local university, intending to fulfill his long-held dream of becoming a diplomatic translator. Before starting his studies, he used the savings he had accumulated over the years to buy a small house, hearing that the northern lights could be seen there in winter. He looked forward to it. Living alone allowed him to better manage his own time. He taught himself Finnish while also taking electives in German, Japanese, and Spanish. By his second year of university, he had been accepted into a specialized training program. In the midst of his busy studies and work life, he rarely thought about the past. His marriage to Qingwan seemed to have become a distant memory. Here, he was simply himself, a completely independent person. In his 5th year in Finland, he successfully entered the embassy and became a diplomatic translator. However, he had no idea that even after 6 years, Qingwan had never stopped searching for his whereabouts. Back at the Su Group office, her assistant entered with a look of pure joy. The assistant announced they had finally found him, handing over the report. Qingwan stood up immediately. A rare trace of joy appeared on her face, leaving the assistant stunned. It had been 6 long years since she had seen President Su smile like that. Ever since Gu had divorced her, not even billion-dollar deals could elicit such a genuine reaction. Qingwan started to head out, but stopped at the door and turned back. She demanded his detailed current information immediately. With a surge of excitement rising in her chest, Qingwan couldn't help but let a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. She looked at the family photo on her desk, her gaze lingering affectionately as she traced the lines of Gu's gentle face. She vowed to clear up the misunderstandings between them and bring him back to her side. Meanwhile, Gu never bothered to check on the lives of Qingwan and Yinshin. In his mind, they surely had the husband and father they had always wanted. His days were busy and fulfilling, spent attending international conferences and translating documents. That is, until one day, his supervisor approached him with a Chinese proposal for a new energy project, speaking with great earnestness. The supervisor told Gu that he was the most capable in the department and that the Finnish National Business Promotion Bureau placed high importance on this proposal, hoping he could finish the translation quickly. Gu looked at the thick stack of documents, offering a sincere and professional smile as he promised to complete the task. However, when he finally opened the project proposal, he was stunned to find it belonged to the Su Group. Suddenly, the familiar image of Su Qingwan flashed through his mind once more. He shook his head and took a deep breath, telling himself that since the Su Group's projects spanned the globe, it was only natural they would expand to Finland. It was surely just a coincidence, or so he hoped. After pulling several all-nighters, Gu finally finished the translation and knocked on his supervisor's office door. The supervisor flipped through the pages, nodding in approval. He remarked that Gu truly was a talent whom even the senior officials had praised during their inspections. Having worked with this man for 2 years, Gu understood his temperament quite well. Once the supervisor started giving praise, it usually meant a difficult task was coming. But then again, who doesn't enjoy a compliment? Most of his colleagues had been lured into extra work by such flattery. Gu told him to stop being mysterious and just assign the task, joking that any more praise would go straight to his head. The supervisor explained that the domestic Su Group was coming to Finland for a site inspection, and the Finnish side was taking the visit very seriously. He had already signed Gu up for the diplomatic translation work. He added that one shouldn't focus solely on work, as life required a bit of balance as well. To be honest, the supervisor seemed to have more than just business on his mind. He noted that Gu was still single and mentioned that the representative from the Su Group was young and charming, suggesting they should get to know each other. Deep down, Gu felt a sudden surge of unease. He wondered if the representative could actually be Qingwan, though he told himself such a coincidence was impossible. When the Su Group representatives arrived in Finland, the supervisor brought Gu along to the airport to welcome them. The group had prepared a dinner banquet. It wouldn't be too formal, so Gu was told to stay relaxed during the translation. The supervisor told him not to be nervous, promising to introduce the Su Group's representative very soon. Just then, we see the supervisor waving behind them, calling out to Director Su as he led Gu forward. When he stood before Su Qingwan, Gu was completely stunned. 6 years had passed, yet time had left no mark on her. She remained as silent and reserved as ever, until the supervisor gave Gu a gentle nudge and began the introductions. The supervisor introduced him as Gu Yintsi, a member of the translation department at the embassy in Finland. He explained that Gu would be the one accompanying her as the official translator for the duration of her trip. He boasted that while Yintsi was young and handsome, he was also a talent who was fluent in 5 languages. Before him, Su Qingwan's gaze was fixed intently on his face, her eyes filled with deep scrutiny and unreadable emotions. Gu offered a polite yet distant smile as he reached out his hand, greeting her formally as Director Su. She stared at him for several seconds, her expression unreadable, before finally reaching out to shake his hand. Meeting her was entirely unexpected, and he only wanted to finish the task. But when he tried to pull away, she held on tight. After 2 failed attempts to release his hand, Gu frowned, his tone turning cold as he asked what she meant by this. Sensing the sudden tension, the supervisor quickly stepped in to smooth things over with a nervous laugh. He joked that Gu's unique charm always left an impression, and it seemed Director Su was no exception. With dark, brooding eyes, Qingwan finally let go, her lips curling into a rare and somewhat forced smile. She said nothing more and released him as he wished. The banquet began shortly after, and he tried to put it out of his mind. He told himself this was just a brief professional encounter. After all, she certainly hadn't come all this way for him. Steadying his nerves, he sat beside Qingwan and translated every word with calm composure. She sat elegantly, legs crossed. As she leaned in slightly to listen, Gu hesitated for a moment, struck by a sudden, bitter realization. During their 5 years of marriage, she had never once listened to him so intently. It was a painful thought, to be honest. He wasn't feeling bitter for her sake, but for his own, for the hollow shell he had become as the Su family's son-in-law. Those were years where his soul was imprisoned, devoid of freedom. Fortunately, he had finally escaped that life. Meanwhile, Su Qingwan's voice continued. She mentioned wanting to know more about Finland's taxation and labor laws, her voice low and deliberate. After every sentence, she would watch him with a quiet, focused intensity. Gu instinctively avoided her gaze, maintaining a strictly professional demeanor to finish his work. The negotiations at the banquet proceeded smoothly for both parties. Later, amidst the Finnish wind and snow, Gu tightened his scarf. adjusting his sheepskin gloves as he shared a brief, final exchange with Su Qingwan and Director Cui, wishing them a pleasant partnership. Having said his piece, he turned to leave. But just as he opened his car door, the woman behind him suddenly called out his name. Gu Yinzi froze in his tracks, but didn't turn around. He waited in silence for her to continue, even as the wind made his fingertips go numb. Her voice finally reached him once again, asking if he had anything at all to say to her. To be honest, he wasn't quite sure what to make of it. It might have been his imagination, but her raspy voice seemed to carry a hint of inexplicable grievance. His heart flickered, but he dismissed it as the finish cold. He addressed her formally as Director Su, stating that his duties as a translator for the banquet were complete. As for anything else, he had nothing to say. But Su Qingwan wasn't ready to let him go just yet. Her usual cold composure was beginning to crack, replaced by a touch of desperation. She reminded him of how he had divorced her without a word. Even if he didn't care about her, she asked if he had no regard for Nianqin's feelings. 6 years had passed, and Nianqin was now 9 years old. She asked him, with a hint of disbelief, if he didn't miss the child at all. He turned around and offered a calm, effortless smile. He asked what there was to miss about a child who disregarded her father's sacrifices. Besides, he added, she was likely very happy now that she had a new father to look up to. As the snow settled on Su Qingwan's shoulders, she looked at him with a flicker of confusion. Then, in a rare moment of concession, she sighed. Stepping closer to him through the slush, she softened her tone, a rare sight indeed, and insisted that Nianqin had never ignored his efforts. She explained that Nianqin was simply too young to know how to show love, and she certainly didn't have a so-called new father. She looked him in the eye and told him firmly that his daughter's only father would always be him. Gu's gaze remained fixed on her face. He couldn't help but find it all a bit laughable. Whether one knows how to love has nothing to do with age. Su Qingwan and Nianqin could remember Jiang Jinglan's birthday and spend hours hand-carving safety amulets for her. How could this mother and daughter not know how to love? They simply didn't know how to love him. He leaned against the car, watching her. He couldn't help but wonder, if he were still her husband, would she be standing here speaking so calmly to him? He shook his head with a self-deprecating smile, prompting Su Qingwan to frown in confusion and ask what he was laughing at. He didn't mind her gaze at all. He simply told her that he laughed because her words were genuinely funny. He pointed out that whether they were divorced or not, they weren't exactly close. She knew next to nothing about him. Furthermore, he had no interest in revisiting the past. Ignoring her lingering gaze, he got into the car and drove away. Returning home, he washed up and collapsed into bed as a wave of deep exhaustion finally washed over him. He fell asleep quickly, only to be jolted awake late at night by the frantic barking of a neighbor's hunting dog. Taking a few deep breaths to clear his head, he dressed and went to the window to investigate the disturbance. There stood Su Qingwan, still in that same black dress, right outside his door. He had no idea how she found his address. Finnish nights averaged 20 to 30 degrees below zero. In that outfit, if she stayed out there all night, he estimated he would find a human ice sculpture by morning. Regardless of her intentions, he opened the door. He invited his ex-wife inside, mostly because he didn't want her dying on his doorstep. It was a practical choice, really. By the warmth of the fireplace, he politely handed her a cup of coffee. She was shivering uncontrollably from the cold. She clutched the warm cup for a long time before finally exhaling and offering him a small, rare smile. Gu's gaze flickered. She rarely smiled at him. Usually, she was cold and expressionless. He asked what she actually wanted. Su Qingwan lowered her eyes, the frost on her eyelashes slowly melting away. Perhaps it was just the lingering cold, but her voice carried a faint, weak tremor as she admitted she wanted to know why they had actually divorced. Gu stared at her face, and she met his gaze with a look of genuine confusion and bewilderment, though he felt nothing but indifference. A complex wave of emotions hit him as he realized those 5 years had been completely ignored. He exhaled, suddenly feeling a pang of regret. He told himself he should have just left the lights off and let her freeze outside. After a long silence, she finally spoke a name, Yinzi. It was almost laughable. The first time she seemed truly serious about understanding him was 6 years after their divorce. Gu's gaze towards Su Qingwan inevitably turned mocking as he asked if she had ever considered why they had truly parted ways. He wondered if she even knew who initiated the idea. Su Qingwan froze for a moment, a rare look of lost uncertainty in her eyes. She had always been this way, privileged, successful, and sharp-minded, handling every professional matter with effortless ease. Yet, that same competence made her indifferent to everything around her, as if life would always follow the path she laid out. Perhaps he was one of the few exceptions to her control. For some reason, he felt a sudden, inexplicable heat behind his eyes. He quickly adjusted his posture, pushing down the bitter emotions rising in his throat. He reminded her of what he'd said before the divorce. He told her that since she and Nianqin loved Jiang Jinglan so much, he would agree to the split and give up custody of the child. He had even offered to leave with nothing, requesting that their joint assets be transferred to Nianqin's name instead. It was meant to be child support from a father who knew he wasn't liked. He had explained all of this to her, word for word. At this point, we see him look directly at Su Qingwan and ask if she has any memory of that conversation at all. Su Qingwan's hands tightened around her cup, her brow furrowing as she tried desperately to recall that moment. But the blankness in her eyes gave her away. She remembered absolutely nothing. He wasn't surprised by this outcome, of course. He knew she had never truly listened to a single word he said back when he was her husband. To her, he was just a partner in name. Su Qingwan lowered her head, her voice heavy with a sense of lost guilt as she admitted she had no memory of those words. She suggested she might have been busy, but insisted she couldn't accept that as the sole reason for their divorce. He looked at her, thinking of all those nights he had returned home to find her cold and distant, and wondered what she expected. He asked her if the scent of another man's perfume on her clothes was a sufficient reason for their divorce. Su Qingwan's expression shifted as she finally caught the contradiction in his words, shaking her head in disbelief. She asked if he had truly divorced her because of Jiang Jingran, her voice laced with a growing sense of irony. To her, divorcing over Jiang seemed more absurd than divorcing because she never listened. Meanwhile, he simply sipped his coffee. He nodded with cold indifference, noting that she returned home every single day carrying Jiang Jingran's scent on her. Even their daughter, Nianxin, constantly spoke of wanting Uncle Jiang to be her father instead of him. He asked why he should have clung to the title of the Su family's son-in-law, causing Su Qingwan's face to turn pale. She asked if he suspected her of having an affair, but he simply wagged a finger in front of her face. It wasn't about suspicion, it was about how she took Jiang to every event and let others introduce them as a pair. It was about the moments her friends mocked him, laughing about how she and Jiang were a much better match. And it was about how she signed the divorce papers without even looking, just to rush off and be with Jiang sooner. At that point, whether she had actually cheated or not simply didn't matter anymore. The marriage was already over. He explained that he simply didn't want to let himself die slowly inside the cage of being the Su family's son-in-law. He divorced her because he refused to remain a family member in name only, a mere shadow in Su Qingwan's life. Deep down, he had felt trapped in that prestigious cage for far too long, and he was tired of playing the part. Su Qingwan's eyelashes trembled as she remained silent for a long time, perhaps stunned by his blunt honesty. Maybe she didn't expect these words, or maybe she never truly cared about his feelings and just wanted to analyze her failure. In his eyes, this post-mortem was unnecessary. She clearly loved Jiang, remembering his birthday and preparing elaborate surprises. She knew Jiang's every preference, and because she loved him, this failed marriage would likely be forgotten in her future. He checked his watch. It was 4:30 in the morning, and felt a wave of exhaustion finally wash over him. He finally spoke up to see his guest out, suggesting that since President Su had learned everything she wanted to know, it was time for her to leave. He was about to say he needed to rest, but before he could finish, he heard a voice, clear and solemn, that made him freeze in his tracks. The words caught in his throat as Su Qingwan looked at him with an unwavering gaze and softly whispered, "I'm sorry." She admitted she hadn't known about those details, nor had she noticed the grievances he had been forced to endure for so long. She confessed she was wrong and offered an apology, which, to be honest, he found more than a little bit amusing. He mused that being the only person to receive an apology from the haughty Su Qingwan was quite a feat, until she suddenly interrupted his thoughts. She told him she disagreed with one point. She insisted she never cheated and didn't actually love Jiang Jingran at all. She explained that she only looked after Jiang and granted his every request to fulfill her late sister's dying wish. The reason she didn't correct people when they called him brother-in-law was simply because, had her sister lived, he truly would have held that title. He told her it didn't matter anymore, a cold response that seemed to sting her as a flash of hurt crossed her eyes. She insisted it was very important, claiming that during the 6 years he was gone, both she and their daughter, Nianxin, had missed him dearly. She expressed her hope to dissolve the resentment in his heart so that he might finally return to the family. For a split second, he genuinely thought Su Qingwan was joking. After waiting 10 years for his freedom, she was now asking him to come back. A burst of trembling laughter escaped his chest as he found himself unable to hold it in, leaving Su Qingwan looking utterly bewildered. It seemed she truly didn't understand the joke, so he wiped a tear from the corner of his eye and took several deep breaths to steady himself. He asked her if she was kidding, pointing out that he had fought hard for this divorce and had finally built a career of his own. With his own life finally on track, he asked her why on earth he would ever consider returning to that household. Besides, he wondered what he would even do there, go back to acting like a servant and fussing over her every need? He mocked the idea of going back to delivering that ridiculous seafood porridge to her office every day just to be ignored. He told her that if she felt guilty toward her sister and wanted to care for Jiang Jingran, she certainly didn't need him there to watch. He made it clear that he owed nothing to her sister, nothing to Jiang Jingran, and certainly nothing to Su Qingwan herself. Su Qingwan tried to speak, but he had already reached the door and flung it open, letting the cold wind rush inside as he told her to get out. He warned her not to make him repeat himself. Finally, she left, but he was left so exhausted that sleep simply wouldn't come. He endured the long night until morning, forcing himself to find the energy to head to his job as a translator at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Upon arriving, he was met by his supervisor, who stood before him and spoke with a heavy, earnest tone about his performance. The leader noted that while he hadn't been there long, his work ethic was exemplary and his professional skills were beyond reproach. It turned out that the domestic Sue group was planning to launch a new energy project over in Finland. This was a major development for relations between the two countries, and the relevant Finnish officials were quite interested. They wanted to accompany President Sue back to her home country for an inspection, but they were missing one crucial person, a translator. The supervisor informed him that he had already submitted his name to the higher-ups, selecting him for the assignment. He was to represent the ministry and return to his home country. After 6 years away, it seemed like the perfect timing. The leader suggested he use the trip to reunite with his family, while he listened with a polite smile that masked his racing thoughts. He couldn't help but blame Su Ching-wan for the sudden complication, yet he maintained his composure and stood up to accept the task. He assured his boss the mission would be a success, and by that afternoon, he found himself boarding a private jet with Su Ching-wan and the delegation. We see them on the plane, and for some reason, perhaps by design, he was seated right next to Su Ching-wan, separated only by an armrest. Exhausted, he rubbed his temples and turned his head away. Despite neither of them having slept, Su Ching-wan showed no signs of fatigue. Before long, he felt a soft, thick blanket being draped over him, as Su Ching-wan moved with surprising gentleness. She was being incredibly careful, as if terrified of waking him, but he was wide awake. He just didn't want to look at her. To him, she was someone he had once truly loved, but she was also the cage that had trapped him for far too long. Their bond had been severed the moment the divorce papers were signed, yet he was unprepared for what awaited him the moment they landed. We see a young boy waiting in the arrival area, held by the hand by Mother Sue. It was Nianchen, his only remaining blood relative, now 9 years old. The boy had grown quite a bit, and his eyes were red and puffy. The moment he spotted him, he cried out for his father. The leaders of the delegation exchanged confused glances, whispering about what was happening, while he maintained a polite, calm smile. He remarked smoothly that the little boy must have lost his father, causing Su Ching-wan's expression to darken instantly beside him. It seemed she understood Finnish after all. Nianchen tried to run toward him, but Mother Sue, ever the dignified lady, held the boy back. She didn't let the child continue his scene, leading him away instead. Deep down, he knew Mother Sue hadn't come out of the goodness of her heart. Perhaps she intended to use Nianchen to pressure him into something. It was hard to say, but he no longer had any reason to be her obedient puppet. The next few days spent accompanying the Finnish delegation to the Sue group went smoothly enough, as Su Ching-wan was nothing if not professional. However, the moment the inspection ended, she approached him, asking if he wanted to go home to see Nianchen, claiming the girl missed him. He simply shook his head at the idea. After all, the child had never liked him much to begin with. Now that he had been gone for 6 years, she likely hated him even more. She had always preferred Jiang Jingran as a father figure anyway. He suggested that if she wanted to fulfill the girl's wish, she should just marry Jiang Jingran sooner and settle the matter for everyone. That way, her future husband could help her raise the child. Su Ching-wan looked utterly exhausted by his tone. She called him by his name, Guyen, asking if they really had to speak to each other this way, but he only gave her a cold, indifferent look. He noted that if she didn't like the conversation, they didn't have to speak at all, before packing his things and heading straight to his hotel. There was no reason to return to the Sue household. Later, his mood brightened considerably when he learned an old friend was also in the country. He quickly arranged a meeting, and the moment they saw each other, her eyes lit up with genuine joy as she took his hands. She spun him around to look at him before pulling him into a hug, exclaiming that this was finally the man he was always meant to be. After 6 years apart, the two friends had endless things to discuss, and once they started talking, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Hours passed in an instant, but just as they were enjoying themselves, his phone rang unexpectedly. It was an international call. Looking at the unfamiliar international number, Guyen hesitated with a frown before finally answering, only to hear a woman's tentative voice on the other end. She asked politely if she was speaking with Nianchen's father, identifying herself as the boy's head teacher. It turned out Nianchen had gotten into a fight at school. She had tried calling his mother, but the boy insisted she contact him instead. His friend, annoyed by the interruption, snatched the phone away and told the teacher she had the wrong number before hanging up abruptly. The friend muttered that Su Ching-wan must be losing her mind, considering they were divorced and he had already given up custody. He had only been back in the country for a few days, and it felt like they were looking for trouble, but then the phone began to ring once more. He answered again, finding the teacher's tone now urgent and impatient as she addressed him as Nianchen's father. She insisted that he come to the school as quickly as possible, regardless of any personal matters. She lectured him that adult issues shouldn't affect a child's development, especially since Nianchen had actually caused a head injury to a classmate. The other parents were demanding he take the child to the hospital, so with no other choice, he and his friend headed to the school. Inside the office, we see several children looking disheveled, but while the others had parents by their side, Nianchen stood entirely alone. The injured student's parent held their child while pointing a finger at Nianchen, unleashing a barrage of harsh accusations. The parent shouted about how a child so young could be so cruel, asking if his father had never taught him not to hit people. Before the parent could even finish, the other children began laughing and jeering in a chorus, shouting that Nianchen didn't even have a father. Nianxin's eyes turned red with rage, and like a wounded wolf cub, he lunged forward to start the fight all over again. It was clear the Su family had given him formal combat training, but the other child was being shielded by an adult. When the boy spotted Gu Yan at the door, his eyes welled up with tears, yet he stubbornly bit his lip to keep them from falling. He turned his head away and stood up straight. Gu Yan, ignoring the boy's reaction, walked in and scanned the room calmly. He offered a brief, detached introduction, stating he was Nianxin's biological father but was divorced from the mother. He clarified that since he had no custody, any talk of systematic compensation would have to be handled by the mother, Su Qingwan. Nianxin looked up in utter disbelief, and in that brief moment, we see him quickly lower his head to wipe his eyes with a movement so fast. It was as if he were terrified of being caught. It's ironic, really, considering how often this child used to urge his parents to divorce when he was younger. At the mention of Su Qingwan, the other parents exchanged glances, their aggressive energy suddenly deflating. Her name, after all, was a permanent fixture on the front pages of every financial news outlet. To be honest, there were likely very few people in the city who didn't recognize her. A minor issue like this could have been settled easily without her presence, yet she had insisted on throwing the problem onto Gu Yan's shoulders. Perhaps she thought this would awaken his paternal instincts, but she seemed to have forgotten that love is a two-way street. One parent finally spoke up, insisting that even if Gu Yan was divorced from President Su, he still needed to provide an explanation for Nianxin's violent behavior. Gu Yan nodded, his gaze drifting indifferently toward the boy as he asked why he had started the fight. Nianxin simply stiffened his neck, refusing to utter a single word. Gu Yan told him that if he didn't want to talk, he could wait for his mother, as he had other things to do. He made it clear he didn't have time to waste here. Before he could finish, Nianxin erupted like an enraged little beast, shouting at him. He screamed that they were all saying he didn't have a father and asked if Gu Yan was satisfied now. Then, he demanded to know why his mother didn't just marry Uncle Jiang instead. He claimed that Jiang would never treat him with such cold indifference and neglect. The boy shouted that he hated him. Gu Yan waited for the outburst to end before raising an eyebrow, noting that back when he was still married to Su, it was somewhat understandable for the boy to scream about wanting Jiang Jingran as a father. But now that the divorce was final, he told the boy that if he wanted a new father, he should go find one himself. The other parents looked at each other, their whispers filling the room. They murmured about how such a young child could have instigated his parents' divorce, noting that it was no wonder his father didn't want him. One parent mentioned they had seen this Jiang Jingran before, as he was frequently seen accompanying President Su to various high-profile events. They admitted they had assumed he was her husband, never imagining he was actually the other man in the marriage. Nianxin was at a rebellious age where such words were unbearable. He turned to bolt out of the room in a fit of rage. But he had only taken a few steps before he was forced to retreat. Su Qingwan had arrived, flanked by assistants and bodyguards, her face a mask of cold indifference. Her presence was overwhelming. As soon as she entered, the office felt crowded, her sharp gaze sweeping over everyone as she demanded to know what happened. The parents looked at each other in silence, none of them daring to speak first. We see that even Nianxin seemed terrified of her. The boy stood to the side with his head bowed, hardly daring to breathe. Gu Yan glanced at her indifferently, noting it was good she had finally arrived. He told her that as the child's guardian, she should be the one to handle this, before turning to leave. A little later, he met up with his friend. His friend, seeing him return, couldn't help but comment on that little ungrateful wolf, suggesting Gu Yan shouldn't have bothered helping him at all. He reminded Gu Yan that after he left years ago, the boy had thrown a tantrum, demanding that Jiang Jingran become his new father. After Su Qingwan slapped him for it, the boy had even tried to run away from home, nearly getting himself kidnapped in the process. Supposedly, it was Jiang Jingran who risked everything to save him. To be honest, it seemed the two of them were perfectly suited for each other. Gu Yan and his friend headed straight for a bar, quickly putting the school incident behind them. However, he didn't expect what would happen next. As they stepped out of the bar feeling a bit tipsy, they ran right into Su Qingwan and her son. She was holding Nianxin's hand, waiting outside. We see her eyes flicker with emotion the moment she saw him. She called out his name, Nianxin, and asked if they could talk. Su Qingwan was the type who never gave up until she got what she wanted. Not wanting to waste time arguing, Gu Yan sent his friend home first. He followed the mother and son into their car. Nianxin took the front seat while Gu Yan and Su Qingwan sat in the back together. The atmosphere inside the vehicle was incredibly heavy. One could almost hear the driver nervously swallowing as they drove toward a restaurant. When they arrived, a waiter politely moved to open the door, but Su Qingwan beat him to it. Gu Yan simply ignored her outstretched hand. He stepped out and realized this was the same restaurant he had booked for his birthday 6 years ago. Back then, he had invited her to celebrate. The woman hadn't even replied then. In fact, she had booked the entire place for Jiang Jingran, leaving Gu Yan without even a meal. Now, ironically, she had booked the whole place for him. Unfortunately for her, he no longer needed any of this. He sat down and got straight to the point. He told her to say whatever she wanted, but added 2 conditions. No talk of transferring custody, and absolutely no talk of remarriage. Su Qingwan frowned, her eyes looking pained, while Nianxin glared at him with red, tearful eyes. But Gu Yan felt nothing for them anymore. The silence stretched until Su Qingwan finally spoke, her voice trembling as she asked why he had ever married her if he didn't love her. She admitted she had always believed they were a perfect match and that he was the most suitable son-in-law for the Su family. We see a flicker of pain in her eyes, a rare moment of vulnerability that would have moved him once, but not anymore. Gu Yan, however, was pulled back into a memory that made his blood run cold. He asked her if she truly thought his life had been easy. He reminded her that he wasn't naturally a top student who loved studying. Rather, his path had been forced upon him from a young age. Since he was 16, her family had chosen him to be groomed as the future Su son-in-law, a role he never actually wanted. When he rebelled as a teenager, they sent him away to a strict academy, only releasing him when the wedding date finally arrived. That period of his life was a nightmare he still refuses to revisit. To be honest, being her husband was never a prize to him. He confessed that he had once hoped for a loving marriage and a happy son, but they were the ones who shattered that dream. They made him realize that the Su family was nothing more than a cage, one that would have eventually destroyed him if he hadn't escaped. Now that he has built a new life for himself, he made it clear that he has no intention of going back to that prison. The best thing they can do now, he told them, is to stay away and stop interfering with his peace. As for this restaurant, he admitted that ever since that night 6 years ago, the very thought of this place made him feel utterly disgusted. Without giving the mother and son a chance to respond, he grabbed his bag and headed for the exit. But then, her voice stopped him. Su Qingwan claimed she had no idea he had suffered so much, yet she still had one more question she felt compelled to ask. She asked if his past desire for a happy home meant he had actually loved her, and if there was any chance for a new beginning. Guyan didn't look back, and he didn't offer an answer. He simply left. However, the surprises weren't over just yet. Wei's father actually showed up at the door, wearing a smile that was both flattering and somehow entitled. He asked where Wei had been all these years. His father asked where he had been all these years and why he hadn't called home. Guyan looked at the man's graying hair in silence. He wasn't sure how to feel. The powerful man who once controlled his every move was now standing before him with his head bowed. It was as if everything that had once haunted him was no longer invincible. He told Mr. Gu to speak his mind directly. The older man hadn't expected such a cold, experienced tone. We see the smile on his face freeze for a moment, nearly crumbling under the pressure. He claimed he hadn't come for much, only that it had been years since his son was home. He asked if he could come back for a meal, mentioning that lately, President Su had been looking after their family quite well. The father insisted he could tell she still had feelings for him. To be honest, he was clearly fishing for a reconciliation. He pointed out that the divorce happened without consulting the family, and suggested that now that he was back, the two families should talk again. After all, he reminded him, he was meant to marry President Su since he was 16. Guyan heard the hidden meaning behind those words, and his smile grew increasingly cold. It was a look of pure disdain. He asked if his father was suggesting he remarry Su Qingwan. Mr. Gu nodded eagerly, his sharp yet cloudy eyes once again gleaming with calculation. Guyan couldn't help but scoff, asking what favors the Su family had promised this time. Was it resources, a partnership, or a new project? He told him that if the Gu family only survived by selling their son, then they might as well go bankrupt as soon as possible. His words were merciless, and the father's smile finally vanished. The old man snapped, asking if a few years away had made him think he was too powerful to respect his own father. He blamed some loose-lipped snake for telling Su Qingwan that he was the one who sent his son to that strict academy. Because of that revelation, she had suddenly withdrawn her investments. In just one night, the Gu family's assets had been cut in half. He insisted that, no matter what, Guyan had to go and see her today to fix this. As the man reached out to grab his arm, Guyan brushed him off. Yet, surprisingly, he agreed to return to the Gu estate. It was time to finally deal with the rot of his past. An hour later, at the Su residence, he saw Su Qingwan again. Gunyenshin was sitting right beside her. Ignoring them both, Guyan simply found a seat, and after a moment, she spoke. She began to explain why she had called him there, but he cut her off, making it clear her reasons didn't matter to him. He told her that his absence was the best thing for everyone. Su Qingwan's eyes dimmed instantly, and she let out a long, weary sigh. She claimed she had no intention of forcing him, but once again, she didn't get the chance to finish her sentence. This time, it was Mr. Gu who interrupted, smiling as he placed a bottle of fine wine on the table and warmly greeted Su Qingwan and her son. He invited them to taste his private collection, dismissing Guyan's behavior by saying the boy had always been willful since childhood. The father insisted he had already lectured his son, claiming that Guyan's return this time was for one reason only. He suggested that Guyan was back to live a good life with President Su, even proposing they pick an auspicious date for a wedding. We see him subserviently pouring wine for Su Qingwan. Perhaps, in his eyes, his son had always been nothing more than an accessory. He was a tool for exchange, a commodity for profit, anything, it seemed, except a human being with his own agency. But the response didn't come from Su Qingwan. Instead, the doors were suddenly pushed open, and the Gu family guards were shoved aside. An elderly woman wearing a formal administrative jacket walked in, her presence commanding the room. She asked what era they thought they were living in. She mocked the idea of arranged marriages, especially when it involved someone they had tried to poach from her Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In an instant, the atmosphere in the Gu household turned ice cold. Mr. Gu rushed forward to play the diplomat, asking what wind had blown her there. The elderly woman gave a cold snort, her gaze as sharp and piercing as a blade of ice as she looked at him. She reminded him that the marriage law of 1950 had abolished arranged marriages long ago, yet here he was, using force. She pointed out that bringing her colleague from the ministry here against his will was a sign of utter disrespect and a provocation to the system. She asked him quite bluntly if he was trying to drive the wheels of history backward. To be honest, it was a terrifying question. Those few words left Mr. Gu stunned. Even Su Qingwan, who had once viewed Gu Yin as little more than a nanny, looked on in shock. The father stammered, asking how there could be someone from the ministry at a private family dinner. He assumed there must be a mistake. The old leader ignored him completely, turning instead toward Gu Yin with a warm, kind smile that changed her entire demeanor. She called him over to her side. As she looked at Gu Yin, the confusion in Mr. Gu's eyes only grew deeper. Mr. Gu stammered, suggesting the leader must have the wrong person, as he believed his son hadn't even finished university. He couldn't fathom how Gu Yin could possibly be part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. To him, it was simply impossible. He began rambling about the divorce and Gu Yin running away years ago, but before he could finish, guards stepped forward to restrain him. Under the stunned gazes of everyone in the room, Gu Yin stood up and walked to the elderly woman's side with an apologetic look. He apologized for the trouble, feeling regretful that his private family matters had forced her to make a trip to the Gu residence. Before leaving, he had messaged a colleague. This woman was a senior leader at the ministry whom he'd met when he first started. The elderly woman waved off his apology dismissively, reminding him that he was one of the ministry's most outstanding comrades. She praised his talent, noting that despite his youth, he was fluent in 5 languages and possessed exceptional professional abilities. She mentioned she was ending his family leave early, assuming, quite correctly, that his family wouldn't have any objections. Gu Yin replied that he was more than ready to return to his post. The old woman nodded as a white-plated official car arrived. The prestigious vehicle drove straight through the gates, followed closely by several police cars. We see Gu Yin helping the leader inside. As he closed the car door, officers stepped out of the police vehicles and flashed their badges at the bewildered Gu family. They announced an investigation into the school where Gu Yin had been sent previously, demanding that Mr. Gu come with them. The father shouted his innocence, claiming he had done nothing wrong, but his cries for justice fell on entirely deaf ears. The family dinner had ended in utter disaster, but just as things seemed settled, a sudden voice broke the tension. A small voice called out, "Papa." Gu Yan's hand tightened instinctively on the car door as the sound reached him. The old leader turned to him and gave a knowing nod. Being a diplomat is unlike any other profession, after all. Stationed abroad for years, opportunities to see family are rare, and she suggested that some matters are best handled early. With those parting words, the leader drove away, leaving Gu Yin to turn back towards Su Qingwan and her son. Little Nianchen gripped his mother's hand tightly, his eyes brimming with tears as he looked up at the man he called father. The boy struggled to keep his tears from falling, asking if Gu Yin truly didn't want to be his father anymore or if he was being abandoned. Little Nianchen bit his lip, finding it difficult to speak, yet managed to say that he and his mother had missed him terribly these past years. He confessed that he often saw his mother sitting in the study, staring blankly at Gu Yan's old photographs for hours on end. The boy pleaded for forgiveness, admitting he had been immature before, while Gu Yin watched him with a sudden, heavy wave of sadness. After all, this was his own flesh and blood. It was impossible for him not to feel a flicker of heartache for the child. While the man he was now could find peace, he couldn't forgive on behalf of the version of himself that had been so deeply hurt. He looked at the boy calmly, noting they hadn't spent much time together, and for half of those 3 years, the child barely knew the world. Back then, Gu Yin had held him every single day, constantly talking to him and trying to coax out his first words. But those memories were likely gone now. Later, as the boy began to understand the world, his preferences shifted away from his father. It seemed the child had wished for anyone else to be his father, a realization that had cut Gu Yin to the quick. Even if it was just the confusion of a young child, the heartbreak Gu Yin felt in that moment had been very real. In the 6 years that followed, he had been absent from the boy's life, never once checking on his growth or his education. Strictly speaking, he felt he had no right to criticize or lecture the boy now, and yet, there was one final lesson to give. He wanted the boy to understand that even for a child, the excuse of just being a child doesn't make everything forgivable. Nianchen didn't deserve a free pass, and as Gu Yin finished speaking, a piercing cry rang out from behind him. The boy sobbed, calling out that he was sorry, but Gu Yin only paused for a brief second before continuing his walk away. People might call him cold-blooded or irresponsible, but he felt he had already given Nianchen the best start he possibly could. Staying with Su Qingwan meant the boy would receive a top-tier education and no shortage of love, eventually inheriting the entire Su empire. The boy already possessed far more than he realized, and with that thought, a faint smile touched Gu Yan's lips as he quickened his pace. On the day he departed for Finland, Su Qingwan came to the airport, but she didn't ask about remarriage or second chances again. She simply looked at Gu Yin in silence, her eyes filled with a quiet realization that if she could only start over, she would cherish and love him properly, rather than trying to chase back a heart that had already been lost. Su Qingwan admitted she always felt he would be by her side forever, never imagining that her actions, everything she had done, had never actually brought him a single moment of happiness. She was truly sorry. Gu Yin didn't respond to her apology, instead gently suggesting she look up at the boarding display one last time. He noted that she had seen him off once before, though back then, they hadn't managed a proper goodbye. He suggested they do it right this time, but Su Qingwan hesitated, unable to form a complete sentence for a long moment. Standing before her, Gu Yin opened his arms and told her not to be so sentimental. After all, they were still old friends. He offered a final hug, and before he could even finish his sentence, he was pulled into a sudden, warm embrace. The familiar scent of Su Qingwan enveloped him as she held him tightly, very tightly, causing him to sigh and pat her back. Her shoulders trembled so violently that he found it hard to breathe, and when she finally spoke, her voice was strained. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She knew that after she was gone, he would face many hardships and much sorrow. She told him that if he found the right person, he should start a new family, and to remember to treat her well. Su Qingwan held him tight, while he simply shook his head. A cold drop of liquid splashed onto his neck, and he couldn't help but marvel at fate. Sometimes, life truly has a cruel sense of humor. He had always believed Su Qingwan felt nothing for him, which made his departure feel so final. He thought leaving was the best solution for everyone, but in the end, it seemed it was all a mistake. Perhaps this was the truth of it. This relationship was likely a source of regret for Su Qingwan as well. She leaned close to his ear, her voice sounding desperately hoarse. She confessed her deep sadness, realizing she had never embraced him so sincerely before. In that single moment, hot tears welled up in his eyes. Shuiyu gave a small, let-go smile. It didn't matter anymore. They both had to move forward. He told her not to look back. She took his hand and stared into his eyes with absolute gravity, vowing she would never have another husband. She whispered that Nianchen would only ever have one father, knowing that the pain of the past had left him deeply wounded. She understood he wasn't ready to forgive them yet, but promised that both she and Nianchen would wait for him faithfully. If the day ever came where he wished to see them, he only had to say the word, and she would bring Nianchen to him immediately. Her door would always be open for him, she promised. But before she could finish, a small figure suddenly rushed out from behind a pillar. It was little Gu Nianchen, his eyes red from crying, looking up at his father with a gaze full of regret and longing. The boy sobbed, admitting he knew he was wrong and promising to wait until his father was ready to be his daddy again. Gu Yin knelt down, just as he had countless times before, and gently wiped the tears from the boy's face with a soft apology. He told Nianchen that while he couldn't stay by his side right now, he would always be his father, no matter what. That was a fact no one could change, he explained, but he needed to find himself first. Just then, the final boarding call echoed. The announcement for Finnair Flight AY525 filled the terminal, requesting all passengers to proceed to the boarding gate immediately. As the call for Helsinki repeated, we see Gu Yin stand up, knowing that his moment of departure had finally arrived. He gave Nianchen's head one last affectionate pat before looking at Su Qingwan and telling her it was time to take the child home. With those final words, he picked up his small suitcase and turned away. Soon, the plane was soaring high above the clouds. Looking down at the city lights forming a glowing grid, he mused that while blood ties might bring them together again, his choice remained firm. The road ahead was long, and for the first time in his life, he was choosing to live entirely for himself. It was a moment of profound clarity, a realization that his identity was no longer tied to the expectations of others. He was finally free. And as he looked toward the horizon, he realized that personal happiness was the only thing that could truly settle the debts of the past.